The living monitor. It started like any other night, the hum of the cooling fans blending with the muted city noise bleeding through the half-open window. Simon's fingers danced over the keyboard, strings of code unfurling on the screen in a monochrome blur. Outside, the rain tapped against the glass in restless patterns, but his focus was absolute. His latest project, a test, really, was a backdoor worm designed to scan a machine's cache for encrypted files. Nothing malicious. Just practice. At least, that's what he told himself. The target was random. A dead email address scraped from a forgotten forum. His script tunneled into the remote desktop, a dull green cursor blinking on the black terminal. Standard stuff. Until it wasn't. The moment he bypassed the firewall, the screen on his monitor flickered. Just once, a subtle distortion like a ripple on a pond. Then it returned, the usual system files lining up, except there was something wrong. Among the mundane data logs and image directories was a folder named Simon. He frowned. That wasn't possible. This was someone else's machine, a ghost connection halfway across the world. But he clicked it anyway, his stomach tightening. The folder expanded. No code. No documents. Just video files. Short, looping clips. He hovered over the first one. Living room _001. He clicked. The video loaded instantly. A dimly lit room came into view. His room. The same faded posters, the same slouched hoodie tossed on the chair. And there, he froze, himself, on the screen, from behind. His head whipped around, heart hammering, but the empty room behind him mocked his panic. No cameras. No hidden devices. But on the screen, the footage continued. He watched his own silhouette lean forward, typing in real time. Not a recording. A live feed. The next file was labeled Simon _outside _001. With a deep breath, he clicked. Rain. The alley behind his building. A figure lingering near the dumpster, hood pulled low. No face. But unmistakably watching his window. Watching him. A cold sweat slicked his palms as he scrambled to kill the connection. He yanked the Ethernet cable. Disconnected from the network. Yet, somehow, the feed persisted. And then the files began renaming themselves. One after another. Letters reshuffling into words. I see you. The monitor went black. Simon stared at his reflection in the dead screen, breathing ragged. Just a glitch. A sick prank, maybe? He reached for his phone to call. Who? The cops? No crime had been committed, and how would he even explain? Before he could decide, the monitor blinked back on. A single file remained on the desktop now. Open me. He shouldn't have. Every rational thread in his mind screamed against it. But curiosity, or something deeper, pulled him in. The file opened, and a face filled the screen. Not his. Pale skin, dark eyes staring not at the camera, but directly into him. The lips moved, but there was no sound. Then, words appeared, typed out letter by letter. Let me in. A surge of static. The screen flickered again, but this time it wasn't just the monitor. The lights dimmed, the entire room pulsing with some low-frequency vibration. And then, for the first time, Simon noticed his own reflection wasn't moving quite right in the glass. It blinked. The screen wasn't showing him. It was watching him. Simon staggered back, nearly tipping over his chair as the reflection in the monitor shifted again. Not a mirror, not a camera feed, something else entirely. His reflection wasn't just lagging. It was staring. Studying him. And then, without warning, it smiled. Not his smile. The screen shimmered, pixels distorting, bending, as if the glass itself was breathing. His face, no, the face on the monitor, leaned closer. The words returned, typed in that same measured rhythm. "You let me in." He slammed the power button, but the screen refused to die. The reflection's face melted, features slipping into a smooth, blank void before reforming into something sharper. Older. It wasn't him anymore. But it knew him. Simon yanked the plug from the wall. Darkness swallowed the screen, plunging the room into silence. Only the rain, still tapping against the window, reminded him the world outside was real. For a moment, he just stood there, heart pounding against his ribs. Every instinct screamed for him to leave, to run. But he didn't. Not yet. The problem with being a hacker, curiosity always wins. He reconnected the power. The monitor blinked to life, but the desktop was normal. His files. His work. No strange folders. No distorted faces. A nervous laugh escaped his throat. A hallucination, stress, sleep deprivation. Hell, maybe even a virus planted by some rival coder. He'd seen stranger. But just as he reached for his mouse, a new window appeared. A terminal prompt. It was typing. "Still here." His hands trembled as he tried to shut it down. Control plus Alt plus Delegate Task Manager. Kill process. Nothing responded. The screen shifted again. A new video began to play without prompting. It was live footage of his hallway. Outside his apartment door. A figure was standing there. Cloaked in a long, dripping raincoat, face obscured. The figure raised a hand. Knock. 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 Simon froze, staring at the screen as the figure knocked again. Harder this time. But the sound wasn't coming from the monitor anymore. It was coming from the door. His mind raced. Who the hell knew where he lived? Was this a joke? Some elaborate prank by another coder? His hand hovered over the mouse, pulse thundering in his ears. On the screen, the figure took a step closer to the door, head tilting in an unnatural, twitching motion. Another knock. Louder. "Go away!" Simon's voice cracked. The figure didn't move. But the screen did. The hallway footage changed, zooming in. Not on the figure. On the door. More specifically, the locks. He watched in real time as the deadbolt began to turn. Simon lunged for the door, pressing all his weight against it, heart slamming in his chest. The lock stopped. Silence. The screen behind him filled with static, the sound rising in pitch. He turned, breath shallow. And in that dense, digital snow, the words returned. "Open the door, Simon." And then, the static cleared. The live feed was no longer his hallway. It was inside his apartment. The camera feed showed the back of his head. Someone, or something, was behind him. He spun around. Nothing. But the screen didn't lie. And then the voice, distorted and low, whispered from the monitor itself. "Let me in." Simon's breath came in shallow gasps, his ears straining for any sound beyond the software of his monitor and the rain's persistent tapping against the window. The reflection on the screen was no longer his, it was someone, something, just slightly off. The eyes darker. The skin too pale, almost waxy, like a mannequin left too long in the damp. And behind that face, just barely visible through the pixelation, was his apartment. The same cluttered desk, the half-full mug, the hoodie still slung over the chair, but the angles were wrong, stretched, as though viewed from a space just behind the screen. He tried again to power down the computer. The power button clicked beneath his finger. The screen remained alive, pulsing faintly with that same rhythmic distortion, as if the glass itself was a living membrane barely holding something back. The keys. The mouse. All unresponsive. Yet the terminal window was still active. A cursor blinked, patient, waiting. Simon stared at the words now filling the screen. You're ready. His mouth felt dry, the words sticking to his throat. Ready for what? He whispered, though the sound felt lost even before it left his lips. He wasn't expecting an answer. But it came. The text updated, letter by letter. To see. A new file appeared. play_me.mp4. He didn't click. He wouldn't. But the file opened on its own. The video quality was grainy, the footage drenched in that pale, washed-out blue of bad security cameras. A room. His room. Only not quite. The angles were subtly wrong. The walls too narrow. The ceiling felt lower. Like a version of his apartment reconstructed from memory, but stitched together incorrectly, like the dream of a place rather than reality itself. The center of the frame shifted. A figure sat at his desk, back turned, shoulders hunched. Simon. But he wasn't typing. The figure in the footage sat perfectly still. Frozen. Except the head was turning, slowly, unnaturally, until his face came into view. His own face. But hollow. The eyes were black voids. The mouth, open in a soundless scream, stretched too wide, skin pale as bone. Then, with a sudden snap of motion, the figure looked directly into the camera. The video cut to black. Simon's heart hammered against his ribs, adrenaline flooding his veins as he staggered back from the desk. What the hell was this? He scanned the screen, desperate for anything he could recognize as part of normal code, some malicious script, some hidden program, but the processes were all wrong. No file paths. No root access logs. This wasn't software. It was inside the machine. Inside something deeper. And then, without warning, his monitor switched feeds again. The grainy security footage returned, but now it showed outside. Not the hallway. Not the building. The footage showed the street below his window. Rain pounded the pavement in thick sheets, distorting the image, but someone was there. Standing directly beneath the flickering street lamp. A figure. Hooded. Still. Not looking up. Not yet. Simon's pulse roared in his ears as he backed away from the desk, heartbeat nearly drowning out the quiet, mechanical sound now rising from the monitor. Typing. Letter by letter, the text filled the screen. Look again. The feed shifted. The figure outside had moved. Closer. Just barely. But it was enough. And then Simon realized with dawning horror, the rain wasn't distorting the image. The face was. It wasn't pixelation. It was the same face from before. His face. Only now, it was clearer. And smiling. The feed shifted once more, now focusing on his apartment door. The locks. The deadbolt had begun turning again. From the inside. Simon's pulse hammered louder than the rain now, drowning out all rational thought as his eyes darted between the screen and the door. The lock shifted, just a fraction, a hesitant click echoing in the silent room, then another. A steady, deliberate rhythm, as though whatever was behind the door was testing it. Or maybe, he realized with icy dread, it wasn't trying to break in. Maybe it was already inside. The screen flickered again. Not static this time. A reflection. His own face, no, not quite. The skin, pale and stretched tighter than it should be, veins subtly visible beneath the surface. The reflection didn't blink. It didn't breathe. But behind it, deep in the monitor's shadowed depths, something else was moving. A shape. Tall. Angular. And it was watching him. The lock on the door twisted further. Another sharp click. His mind raced, was this some kind of AR trick? A deep fake? No, the precision was too perfect. The feeling too real. His throat clenched as he backed against the wall, searching for something, anything, to defend himself. Then, with a final metallic snap, the deadbolt turned completely. The door didn't open. But the screen did. It didn't crack or shatter, it simply peeled. The glass stretched outward, distorting like a plastic sheet, bending impossibly as something began pressing through from the other side. The reflection rippled, the pale face twisting, splitting open, a jagged crack where its mouth should be. And that whisper, low, mechanical, but too close, spilled from the speakers. "You let me in, Simon." The glass bent further. A hand pressed through, pale fingers twitching, curling over the monitor's edge. Not human. The skin was too smooth. The nails cracked and split. It wasn't climbing through the screen. It was unfolding from it. Simon bolted. His chair slammed to the ground as he stumbled back, crashing against the bookshelf, sending half its contents spilling to the floor. The figure kept emerging, slowly, methodically. A head, shoulders, more limbs folding out from places limbs shouldn't be. And all the while, the face remained frozen. Smiling. But the screen didn't just show the creature anymore. It showed the hallway. And himself. Only, the version on the screen was still standing at his desk. Staring blankly into the void as the thing crawled free behind him. Simon's stomach twisted. He was watching himself being overtaken. Or was he still in the screen? His hand closed around something cold, the coffee mug. Useless. But he flung it anyway. The ceramic smashed into the monitor with a hollow crack. Glass spiderwebbed outward, the image distorting, but the creature didn't stop. If anything, the cracks seemed to spread through it, like they were part of the same entity. And then the sound changed. The rain outside stopped. Silence. No more clicks. No more whispering code. Just the pulse of his own ragged breathing and the faintest static hiss still leaking from the broken screen. But the thing? It was gone. Or at least, it looked gone. Simon stared at the shattered monitor, his reflection fragmented, distorted into a dozen broken shards. Slowly, cautiously, he approached. His reflection tilted its head in unison with him. His own face, his own eyes, no sign of the pale figure anymore. But just as his breath began to steady, the reflection blinked. And Simon hadn't. The crack spread wider. And from deep inside the monitor, something knocked. The knock echoed unnaturally, vibrating through the fractured glass as if the monitor had become something hollow, something far deeper than its physical form. Simon stood frozen, the sound reverberating not just in the screen but somewhere behind his ribcage, like a pulse out of sync with his own heartbeat. He knew he should run, tear the cables from the wall, smash the screen to dust, but the longer he stared into those splintered fragments of his own reflection, the harder it became to look away. The cracks weren't just on the surface anymore. They ran through the reflection, splitting his face apart in delicate, web-like fractures, yet his distorted double remained perfectly still, except for the eyes. They shifted subtly, watching him too directly, with that same unbearable weight he'd felt since the first time the screen had flickered. Another knock. No, not behind the glass anymore. The door. The locks, still undone from before, rattled softly as if touched, tested. But Simon couldn't turn his head, couldn't break the pull of the reflection. The monitor was breathing. He saw it now, the faintest pulse in the fractured glass, as though something pressed just beneath the surface. And then, as he watched, the cracks began to close. Not healing. Sealing. Piece by piece, his reflection stitched itself back together, the distorted fragments smoothing, aligning, until his face was whole again. Almost. The eyes remained wrong. Too hollow. Too sharp. And then it spoke. No words. No sound. The lips simply moved, and the words scrawled themselves across the screen in that same methodical rhythm. "You're already inside." The screen blinked. And Simon realized with mounting horror, he was watching himself. Not his reflection. The screen showed his own back. The exact angle he was standing in now. Except there was a hand behind him. Close. Simon spun, but nothing was there. Only the rain-slick window, the empty doorframe. And his own voice. Flat. Hollow. Whispering from the monitor. You shouldn't have looked. The monitor wasn't reflecting anymore. It was recording. Showing him in real time, frame by frame, only seconds delayed. The figure behind him, he could see it now. Closer in the footage. Stretching forward, those pale, cracked fingers reaching for his shoulder. But there was nothing in the room. Just him. Wasn't there? His gaze snapped back to the screen just as the final line appeared. Watch closely. The footage shifted. It wasn't showing his apartment anymore. It was showing a new room. Smaller. Claustrophobic. The walls a pale, sterile white, with no windows, no doors, just a single black monitor mounted to the wall. On the screen was him. Simon. Staring blankly at his own screen. And behind him, the pale figure. No. It was Simon. A perfect double, eyes hollow, face expressionless, standing in that impossible white void. Watching. Waiting. The screen flickered once more, and the last thing Simon saw before the monitor finally died was the reflection smiling back. Not him. Not anymore.